While African leaders are still in meetings condemning and denouncing coup d'etats, some guys in Guinea-Bissau held the president there and his cabinet to 5 hours of fire. Several were killed, but they were unsuccessful in yet another coup. What exactly is going on in the sub-region? And will ECOWAS and the AU be able to halt the wave of coups celebrated by the citizens? Do you know the cost of elections in this country? To be president, you need a minimum of $100 million US. Where do they get that money from? To be an MP, you need so much. The CDD has a survey that confirms what you already know: the grand corruption and theft of public funds for elections in this country. And the reason we have bad contracts, unconscionable contracts, after a government has won power, contracts that minors with the presence of mind will not sign, are signed by adults who claim to want to protect the public purse. Do they do that to pay their debts? What are the sources of some of the funding of the political parties? Illicit money, galamsey money. How will we overcome this evil? E-levy. Is Ghana broke and yet avoiding an IMF bailout? We have suffered yet another downgrade, if you haven't heard the news yet. What is going to revive and restore this economy? We'll be right back to deal with the vexed matters. I'm Samson Ladianyani. Welcome back. And here's Samson's stake. Injustice and justice. University of Education, Winneba. A viral video of City Authority Task Force, sometimes including police officers, once again is seen assaulting people, including an elderly woman, in the name of enforcing some sanitation rules. And that breaks my heart. Even if the law did not prohibit such conduct, what upbringing emboldens a young man to whip an elderly woman in public? Well, the regional minister was applauded supervising similar unconstitutional and criminal conduct, where his task force flogged and made people squat in and sweep dusty portions of Medina roads for failing to use the footbridge. And there's a specific law to punish people for that. Article 15 of the Constitution prohibits any form of inhuman and degrading treatment and acts likely to diminish their dignity and worth. And that's even when one has been or is in the grips of police or the state for a criminal offense. Even that, the police is not allowed to administer any punishment because the law prohibits that. It's only a court that can do that. Sadly, even the president didn't see any wrong with indiscriminate burning of excavators on site without an opportunity for their owners to be heard. What do you want the people who purported to condemn mob injustice in the murder of a soldier to learn? These injustices, especially by constituted authority, inspire impunity. You think the MCE for Sekandi Takrade is alone in this brazen above the law conduct? He only got unlucky. His act is in the public view. Many police officers, poor civil servants, have suffered naked evil transfers for refusing unlawful instructions, daring to call the bluff of politicians and people connected to power, or for simply being or not being NDC or NPP. Stop the injustice. Now, justice, they say, is sweet when it is swift, but justice may be buried when it is hurried. In a rather swift turn of events in 2017, characteristic of the well-choreographed removal of EC boss Charlotte Osei and her deputies, the University of Education Winneba was also set on edge. There may have been a procedural issue with the university's council and the refusal to reconstitute it, but that should not have led to the bizarre developments that saw the vice-chancellor, a principal officer, and 4 other staff axed from office. One court decision after the other, and a quick installation of a new VC and replacement of other officers saw the university dominate the news. And even the president was accused of complicity and undermining the courts in the induction of a new VC in 2018, at a time a number of suits, including an injunction application, were pending determination. Yes, not even IOCO investigative reports exonerating those affected of alleged procurement wrongs could get them their jobs back. Yes, even a favorable determination of a petition by the education minister was ignored, just like a similar outcome by a committee of eminent persons chaired by a respected Court of Appeal judge. This week, the High Court issued orders compelling their reinstatement and compensation. Some of them may have moved on, but justice at last. And it was refreshing to hear an emergency university council meeting attended by the education minister declare full commitment to restore Professor Mauto Avoke to his VC position, as well as welcome back Dr. Theophilus Akoli and the other affected staff. Res judicata, litigation must come to an end, and the posture of the council must be embraced by all who seek the well-being of the university. The VC position is vacant now, and Professor Avoke has some 2 years or less to serve. His promise of reconciliation should see a united university staff focused on the progress of the University of Education Winneba. All those playing various roles to ensure the end of what sought to destroy this important center of education deserve commendation. Justice hurried, maybe justice buried. And that's my take. We'll be right back and engage my guests on the issue of the wave of coups in Africa, particularly in West Africa. We'll also look at the cost of elections in Ghana. Where do they get the money? and the illicit money, the e-levy, is that leading us to IMF? And we don't want to go to IMF? We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile we put Ghana first. It's brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN everywhere you go, Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 solid years. Waylead Properties, home is where one starts. DBS Industries, we truly are your roof experts. CBG, we stand with you. Fabrimental, your partner in steel. Duroplast, where Duroplast goes, water flows. The Barstow School, start here, go everywhere. And Rehoboth Properties, quality housing for all. As you may be aware, ECOWAS, led by our president, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, who is a chairperson of the authority, has been calling his colleagues since last week to meetings. They did one, I think, by Zoom, and this week they have done one other here in Accra. And what have they been doing? Condemning the coups as expected and issuing threats and bans to the countries that are getting involved in this ugly thing within the sub-region. Except that though it's ugly, the people are hailing it where it is happening in the large numbers. So how will ECOWAS be able to end this? Let's take a listen to this quickly and return to my guests. And my guests include one who predicted last week that there will be at least 2 more coups before the end of 2023. Let's listen to the president and chairperson of the authority.
The resurgence of the canker in our region. Let us address this dangerous trend collectively and decisively before it devastates the whole region. Excellencies, the resurgence of coup d'etats in our region is a matter of grave concern. This evolution challenges the democratic way of life we have chosen. We need to stand firm to protect democracy and freedom in our region. You'll recall that during our virtual summit held on the 28th of January 2022, we suspended Burkina Faso from participating in ECOWAS's institutions and requested the immediate release of President Rochmark Christian Kabore, who was detained alongside other political actors. During our summit, we reaffirmed our commitment to upholding the principle of zero tolerance for ascending to power through unconstitutional means, and therefore demanded an immediate restoration of constitutional order by the military. To assess more accurately the security and political situation in Burkina Faso, we agreed to dispatch 2 missions, respectively, the Committee of ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense Staff, led by the Ghanaian Chief of Defense Staff, on Saturday, 30th January 2022, and a joint ministerial delegation led by the chairperson of the Council of Ministers, the Ghanaian Foreign Minister, including the President of the Commission and the UN Secretary General's representative for the Sahel and West Africa, on Monday, 31st January 2022. Their reports have been submitted for our consideration. Excellencies, I commend our continental body, the African Union, on its firm decision to suspend Burkina Faso from participating in AU organs and institutions, in alignment with the decisions of the ECOWAS Authority on the situations in Mali and Burkina Faso. The African Union expressed strong support to the efforts of ECOWAS in addressing peace and security challenges facing the region, including the resurgence of military coups. This is the solidarity and international coalition that are needed to halt the political turbulence in our region and the continent at large.
Looking at the situation after the presentation of the report of the two missions that gave more information from the contact with the military junta in Burkina Faso, they looked and took several decisions. The first decision that they took was to still decide to maintain the suspension of Burkina Faso from all ECOWAS institutions, to reaffirm condemnation of this coup d'etat, and they also requested the immediate release of President Roch Marc Christian Kabore, release without condition. And on this point, the head of state were very, very firm, because they are expecting really this to be done very, 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 very quickly. And finally, still regarding Burkina, the head of state decided to request the current military authorities to MPSR to very rapidly propose a timetable for the restoration of constitutional order. So this is really, in a nutshell, what has been discussed and concluded by the head of state regarding Burkina Faso. Today, they really stress that it is really important that we stop this coup d'etat, military coup d'etat, because those create more problems than they solve. It is against, as I indicated earlier, basic principle of ECOWAS protocol on good governance and democracy, because this protocol is based on the principle that really power is only attained through election, democratic election. That's the basic principle. And secondly, he also asserts that reaching power through non-constitutional means is totally forbidden, and that the military is non-political, is a non-political institution, so cannot be involved in those type of action. So it was a very, very strong condemnation, and of course they were really very closely linked to that, concerned to what has happened 2 days ago in Guinea-Bissau.
Welcome back. Now let me go to the Zoom and welcome my guest for this morning. Professor Kwadwo Appiagyei-Tuah is Associate Professor of Law, University of Ghana. You heard him last week and previously when it happened in Mali. We are speaking also to Adama Gaye, who is a Senegalese author and former ECOWAS Communication Director. Joining us also is Professor Kwesi Enin, Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research, Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. He was with us last week and he said there will be 2 more coups in the sub-region before the end of 2023. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you very much for making time to join us.
Well, it's always a great
Good morning and thanks for having us.
Great. Let me start with Professor Enin. What's happening? That you sit where you sit and you know that these things will happen, and ECOWAS and AU are not doing proactive things. They are rather acting after the fact.
Well, Samson, thank you very much. I'm not doing anything different. All I'm doing is looking at the developments and the facts and then combining them in multiple ways to be able to draw specific conclusions. Now, I've worked in the African Union before. Critical risk assessments are not tolerated. The African Union Commission is supposed to be a technocratic supranational commission in which the staff must make critical assessments based on the data. But because it's a member states organization and ambassadors are sensitive to their countries being put on the block, there's a tendency to draw conclusions that do not speak to the reality on the ground. And it is the same thing with the quality of intelligence assessments in our member countries. So, for example, when ECOWAS's heads of states meet, what is the quality of intelligence assessments that are placed before them so that whilst they are focusing on Mali, they would have known that, look, Burkina Faso is boiling, okay? That Guinea-Bissau also has problems. And therein lies the challenge, that when our leaders talk about unconstitutionality is not only about when the military takes up arms, it's also about when democratically elected presidents play games or fiddle with constitutions, prevent the media from playing its free role, prevent opposition parties from working, and are unable to translate the democratic dividends into jobs, education, health, housing, and allow corruption to bloom. Okay, so unconstitutionality is not only when the military takes up arms, it is when the democratic experiment fails to deliver public welfare goods. And therein lies the public's apparent support for the military incursions. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we would rather, or most people prefer, the democratic dispensation. But we are speaking with two voices, and we are pulling in different directions, in which there is a tiny political, economic, social elite that has increasingly become oblivious to the pain, the suffering, and the increasing frustration of ordinary people. Something I want to come back to 2 points before I end. Every time I appear on your program and elsewhere, I am sounding like a broken record. From when democracy was reinstituted, from 1992 onwards until now, West Africa's populations have probably increased by between 15 and 20%. Now, these huge numbers don't know about the protocol on good governance, and to be fair, they also don't care, because these protocols are just not dead documents. They must be living documents in which the principles, the norms, the values inherent in them translate in the provision of safety, of security, of development, in which people can have hope for the future. So when last year I predicted a coup, and last week I saw the shock on your face, probably one of the few times, because it took you almost about 15 to 20 seconds to recover. These are the things. And I think our presidents must be raising these questions with their intelligence chiefs. How come that a little pot-bellied man, not particularly handsome, as now that we know from the Takoradi MC statement that handsomeness is now a prerequisite for intelligence. Okay? That not being so handsome, that I can do whatever I am doing, then there's something wrong with the intelligence assessments. Then there's something wrong with the risk assessments. Okay? So we need to look at these things for what they are. Okay? And it's all around us. So yes, will I insist on the two? I will still insist on it. June 2023, things must change and change dramatically and very quickly. Because when those two happen, and I repeat, the pack of cards will begin to fall.
Okay. Professor Page, in September, you told us that the major problem has to do with the lack of strict enforcement of the protocols, and again, because the people embrace what is happening with the coups. I mean, Guinea-Bissau, just a population of under 2 million. They went for elections only in 2019. They have seen about 4 coups and about 9 or so unsuccessful attempts within a very short period. What would you say AU ECOWAS should be doing? Because from what we hear them do, is it not what you propose, that they should try and enforce the protocols?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think it's very important, and it flows from what Professor Enin has said. The AU ECOWAS have very important documents that could work to help avert the situation. And I will limit myself for now to the Lome Declaration on Unconstitutional Changes in Government. That document identifies 5 areas that would constitute unconstitutional changes in government. One is where there is a coup d'etat, which we are experiencing now. Second is where there is mercenary activity to change government. That is where soldiers are imported into the country from outside to instigate changing government. The third is where there is, through civil war or dissident activity, the soldiers from somewhere engage in civil wars to be able to overthrow governments. It happened in a number of countries, Liberia, Zaire, and so on. The fourth is where a government refuses to leave power after losing elections. These are contained in the Lome Declaration. Then a few years later, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance endorsed these 4 elements and included a 5th, which is where a government in power doctors the constitution to remain in power.
Like Alpha Condé did.
Exactly, yes, that's what we call third termism. And so, like Kwesi said, when you are talking about unconstitutionality, it is not just about the coup d'etat, which is the first one. The other elements are equally critical, and it points back to governments in power. When we are talking about, for example, refusal to leave office, there have been a number of cases, starting from Babangida, flowing to Gbagbo, and so on. They refuse to leave office. Even in Ghana, you've had 2 situations where the opposition had to go to court. And when they go to court also, you can talk about the situation in Kenya, the Gambia, and so on. The results have been abysmal. In most cases, they lose. It's only in Malawi and Kenya where the courts have been successful. This points to the gaps and the weaknesses in the democratic system that we are practicing. You're also talking about dissident activity. It happened in Chad, and it was because of the fact that the government there is not practicing democracy on the ground. You talk about mercenary activity. It is also a problem We don't seem to recognize it, but it is taking a different shape and form where Wagner, for example, the Russian military contractors are working in a number of African countries. Mali has recently allowed them to come in. Burkina Faso, it was one of the reasons they said they had a coup d'etat. And when the Wagner group, if you know the history and the background, they cause a lot of instability in these countries because they want to protect the regime in power and they want to engage in mining activities and so particular minerals which are of importance, strategic importance to Russia. And so it is allowing Russian influence within Africa and within the sub-region. Talk about Central African Republic and so on. So when you look at how, when there's a coup d'etat, governments or ECOWAS and so on rush to have meetings and conclude by saying that we condemn the coup d'etat. The constitution, the new regime should return the country to constitutional rule. They should draw a map to return the country to constitutional rule. It is not enough. And so, for that matter, the soldiers are emboldened to engage in this coup d'etat. And they rely on the concept of securitization, saying that there's a security threat. That is a song the coup d'etat makers in Mali sang. That is what Burkina Faso is saying. That is what led to Chad, the president's son, being maintained in power because even Nigeria and France said that for security reasons, the military should remain in power until 18 months or something before they will think about organizing elections. And so they are tapping on these particular weaknesses and using that as a basis to come to power. But what do we see with when they come to power? They tap on the problem of security. And when they come to power, they go to Wagner and say, come and provide security for us. And at the end, there's no security for the citizen. It's not a human-centered security approach they are talking about. It is a regime security they are thinking about, not even national security. So the security architecture is weakening and is causing problems. And that is what we see in Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau is also connected to the narcotics trade. It is a hub where drugs from Colombia, Peru, and so on pass through to get to Europe. Of course, not only Guinea-Bissau, but it is a very porous, weak country with porous borders and so on. And so it creates this problem, which therefore needs to be fixed. And when we are talking about coup d'etat, we're talking about security. It is not a standalone issue. It relates to the bigger picture of transnational organized crime, where you have provision of goods and services and also infiltration of governments, where there's a form of hybrid government that is created. The corruption is used to infiltrate governments. Arms flow easily across borders. And therefore, it creates a network where you have a situation where because of the porous nature of our borders, because of the weak criminal law system that we have, things are not able to be controlled and checked. And therefore, at the end of the day, that insecurity feeds into a situation where people get disgruntled, gets marginalized and disenfranchised, and therefore the military becomes a sort of, they become the heroes when they're able to organize coups. But the problem is that we don't look at the bigger picture of what the military would do. The military will not just come to power and say that we've handed over, let's go away. If there has to be a coup d'etat at all, there has to be some fundamental basics that need to be respected before this can happen and the coup be recognized as such. So if we see people hailing the military takeovers, it means that there's a major deficit in the democratic architecture we're talking about.
Okay.
And there's also some sort of misunderstanding or lack of foresight of what the military can do, or looking back at our history, what the military has done. When they come to power, they don't go away easily. And so that is how we have to see the situation and apply the laws that we are talking about.
Yeah.
When ECOWAS met recently, they were talking about coming up with new laws or strengthening some protocols and so on. That is not the solution. I don't think so. We already have enough laws in place. There's a need for harmonization of the criminal legal system. There's a need to ensure that the police in the security system in each country also cooperates to deal with transnational organized crime as part of the problem.
Yeah, you talk about...
that will help us to deal with some of these problems we're talking about.
Yeah, you talk about opposition that is aggrieved at election results and is unsuccessful in court, for example, or their attempt at litigation. In Guinea-Bissau, the opposition had issues with the elections in 2019. But unlike here in Ghana, where you had the NDC going to court, I'm not aware that they went to court to challenge the results over there. Here in Ghana, too, there are people who have raised issues about the outcome of the election petition taken by the NDC. But there are people who have looked critically at what the NDC did and say that what they put up was a poor and a very weak suit that was not backed by evidence of any fraud. My question is, what can AU or ECOWAS do when an opposition rejects or does not exactly accept election outcomes and maybe may pursue or support a coup d'etat? What should ECOWAS do about that? Should ECOWAS be getting into the elections in African countries?
ECOWAS and AU have adopted a policy of election monitoring as the main means of contributing to democracy in these countries. But that is weak and ineffective because election monitoring takes different shapes and forms. And it begins not at the time the elections are being held, but before, during, and after the elections. There have been 3 or so situations in Africa where, just between last year, March or so, and now, it's about a year ago, 21 elections were held in Africa. Of these, there were 2 boycotts in these countries. In Tanzania and 2 other countries, the AU, when they sent monitoring observers to these elections, they didn't issue their reports. Why? Because the other countries like the EU and other organizations condemned or identified some serious irregularities there. The AU didn't issue their reports. Why? It tells of some sort of complicity, and it tells of the fact that this election monitoring as a means of contributing to democratic governance is just a formality. And so these reports, for example, need to be issued for us to identify how election rigging takes place and why it's contributing to the instability we are experiencing in many African countries today.
Well, people have asked the question, if you lose elections and you are not successful at the court, that should not be a reason to use unconstitutional means. Is that not what you say?
Definitely not. Definitely not. But we then have to look at the constitution of these constitutional courts and the decisions they make. In Cote d'Ivoire, for example, when Gbagbo lost the elections and he went to the constitutional courts, they ruled in his favor. There have been a number of countries where these courts are deemed to be packed by the governments in powers of supporters or those who are on their side. And so the courts are not seen as a fair means of adjudicating election cases, and therefore people are not happy or they don't get satisfied with the outcome. In Ghana, yes, there were some problems, but when Nana Akufo-Addo lost, he conceded graciously. When Mahama lost, it didn't come out directly or openly that he has conceded defeat. Of course, issues have been raised about the strategy that NDC used in contesting the case, but that is another matter. But on the whole, the record indicates that these results, when you lose the election at the ballot box, there is no way you can win it through the courts because the courts are always packed with government cronies, and therefore you are not ready to get any good results from there. Therefore, the dissatisfaction continues. And if not controlled, sometimes it's not the political leaders who will orchestrate the violence, but it is their foot soldiers and their supporters who get disenfranchised and take the law into their own hands.
Right. And last week, the issue came up about the political parties, when they win power, stuffing the security with their supporters. Sometimes they are vigilante groups, the hooligans, they get to pack them into the security. And so you have political party people who are now, dominating, as it were, and it's difficult to get security act professionally. That is a controversial matter, though. But let me get to Mr. Adama Gaye, who you have followed the ECOWAS for a long time. You have worked as a director. Adama Gaye, you have followed the ECOWAS for a long time, and you have been the director of communications at that place. What do you think is wrong? Because the leaders are always accused of acting after the fact. They are not being proactive. And even when they issue their directives, except the ban from the group, it doesn't appear anybody is listening to them. What's wrong?
They are really turning out to be, unfortunately, a laughingstock. They seem to be only defending, unfortunately, their honor. When they speak, like we heard, unfortunately, the words of the President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, and the chairman of the Commission of ECOWAS, Jean-Claude Brou. What we hear is somehow people, the civilian leaders, against another camp, the military. In my view, you have two illegitimacies confronting one another. The civilians, they are not in power to respect the rules. They have lost truly the trust of the population. When they come to power in many of the African countries, you see what they do. You can observe them. When you become a president, for instance, you prevent people who are part of the population, who are in the opposition, who are in the intelligentsia, from experiencing or airing their views. You cut them off businesses, you cut them off from banks, from regional organizations, from international institutions. You do everything just to make sure that everything is captured in favor of your camp. It reduces the breathing space for the people of the countries in Africa. So truly, in my mind, and I can see that there is a problem with the leadership we have in Africa. These are people who came to power supposedly to be democrats. In truth, they are autocrats, and they are unfortunately thieves, taking advantage of the resources, capturing the states. And that's what I've seen. Even a country like mine, Senegal, which so far, I say so far, has not yet experienced a military coup. Senegal has become a problem, for instance. Unfortunately, the OAU, the AU for that matter, is going to appoint between today and tomorrow Mr. Macky Sall as president of the African Union without looking at his background in our country. Personally talking to you, I am a political refugee. 2 years ago, they came to my house and abducted me because I was expressing my view. Mr. Macky Sall didn't want me to say what I think about his mismanagement of the countries, his criminal activities. So they sent me to jail for 53 days. No mention of anything from ECOWAS, where I worked as a director of information in the past. No mention from anybody in this continent. People consider that it's normal today to arrest people like that. So we have a serious problem with the leaders who are running our countries. They are illegitimate, and personally, I encourage military coups to make sure that they're afraid of their position. You know, in diplomacy, we learn something. You either use the carrot or the button. You cannot eliminate the button if you are dealing with people who do not respect the rule. But this is the situation we are facing in Africa and in West Africa in particular. And the so-called leaders who are talking about democracy, good governance, look at it. None of them has mentioned a single word about the fight in Sudan, where the people, ordinary people, are fighting for democracy. They are, to a large extent, supporting the military junta over there. They went to the African Union to do a summit in a country in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where the rulers have been killing people, and nobody is condemning that, and they are not going to mention that for that matter. The chairman of the Commission of the African Union, Mr. Faki Musa Mahamat, he managed to maintain the son of Deby as a military in power. They are allowed to sit on the African Union, not excluded from it, but Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, where popular coup occurred, he decided to exclude them from the organization. So, if you want my opinion, is this: we cannot continue this way. When democracy came to Africa on the heel of the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, Africa had a clear agreement, and I was present personally in 1999 in June in Algiers. The OAU met there and accepted that the military should return to the barracks and the civilian will take over the mantle of leadership in the countries. And they would deliver on that basis the better governance, that they will make sure that democracy will rule, economy will be macroeconomically better managed. Those things were accepted, and the military would restrict themselves to ensuring that you have physical integrity of the territories protected, security and stability. That was the deal. And this was presented to the G7 2 years later in Genoa, in Italy, when the African leaders went there to present what would become the new economic partnership for Africa, the new template of partnership that Africa would have with the rest of the world. That was the deal. But progressively, as we started having democracies returning to the fore and people elected, what we started having is what we at Jeune Afrique, where I used to be a senior reporter in Paris, called the multi-Mobutism. Mobutu was in power in Zaire, that became later on Democratic Republic of Congo. Mobutu was a shrewd leader. When they forced him to democratize, he multiplied himself by creating his own Commission on Human Rights, creating his own media, creating his own multi-party mechanism with his own political parties belonging to him. And he managed to have a fake democracy. All the documents, the legal texts, whether internally or at the treaty level, at the continental or international level, became a mockery, a charade. So this is what we are witnessing. If we don't want to stop, if we don't do an effort to stop the capture of the state by these fake democrats presenting themselves as civilian, what we are going to witness, unfortunately, may be worse than the military coup. It would be the recolonization of Africa. You take the case of Mr. Macky Sall of Senegal. He is elected as chairman of the African Union. At the same time, Mr. Macron is the chairman of the European Union. And in 10 days, they are going to have in Brussels a summit, Europe-Africa, where he will be following the notes and the instructions of Mr. Macron. What is this? And you don't want to talk about it? Clearly, there is a serious threat hovering on the head of our countries, and we cannot allow the likes of Mr. Kasibru and, for that matter, unfortunately, President Nana Akufo-Addo, who is missing the point totally as a seasoned diplomat, because he didn't even stop to pay respect to people being killed in the countries by the civilian, to acknowledge the fact that Mr. Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire, Mr. Alpha Conde before him, Mr. IBK in Mali before him, and Macky Sall, and all the other leaders in West Africa, foreign nothing way, succeeded his father, is a hell, by the way. of the ECOWAS Commission, helping it to steal the elections in Togo. You name it. In Benin, Mr. Patrick Talon, jailing his opponent. Nobody talks about that. And you want to continue business as usual? It is not possible anymore. They created the condition for this disruption by military to start returning to the fore in West Africa. And I think this is going to continue if we are not very serious about making in our countries true democracy flourish, to make sure that it will be a competition of ideas, programs, disruption, to ensure that in the long run, Africa can compete. We have seen this kind of situation elsewhere in the world. I want just to mention one case. In 1974, when Portugal was under authoritarian regime, the militaries attacked and made a coup, what was called La Révolution des Seyers. And since then, since that military coup, that ended up allowing the arrival to power of Mário Soares, the legendary leader of Portugal, Portugal is a democracy. We in Africa may have to go, unfortunately, to that way because of the civilians.
Right.
Unfortunately, they are creating this condition, and we cannot overnight put it under the carpet and allow these leaders, civilians, to come and talk to us the way
thank you, Adam
defending
Agai.
their interests, capturing the states, and preventing.
Thank you very much, Adam Agai. Adam Agai is a Senegalese author and former ECOWAS Communication Director. I'll go to Professor Kwesi for his final brief comments, and also to Professor Kojo Appiah-Adjei to do so. Same. Professor Enin, look, what Adama is talking about is about bad governance. The ECOWAS continues to stress that they are committed to good governance, rule of law. What do you think is likely to happen? Some say this wave, it appears, may not stop.
No, Samson, and I'll repeat myself. The principles, the norms, the values inherent in AU documents, ECOWAS documents, only become live and useful if they translate into providing security, jobs, good education, stability, health for people. Politics and the principles inherent in the documents underpinning them have a practicality to it. They must translate into improving people's lives. Also, this perception that there is an elite group who are not impacted on by the laws that they make for others simply does not work anymore, precisely because, look, the demographics have changed. People have become intolerant. People know what is happening thanks to modern communication to youth in Tokyo, in Canberra, in Johannesburg, and elsewhere. And they want the same things for themselves. A responsive set of leaders who are attuned to people's needs. Okay? Constitutionality is about creating an enabling environment in which citizens will say, handsomeness is not a criteria for jobs. Handsomeness is not a criteria for becoming a police officer. Handsomeness is that Samson can invite me to share my views because the Ghanaian taxpayers' money has given me an education that can contribute to creating a stable, functional, democratic, responsive, dialogic, and consensual type of politics. That is what politics is about.
Last week, yourself, Professor Appiah-Adjei, and also Colonel retired Festus Aboagye were so blunt, and as you saw, there were times that I really got shocked. I didn't know how to respond or react.
That was the first time I saw you.
Yes. Now, Kenneth Abaje, for example, was very blunt about listing the developments that have gone on in this country over a period. The youth bulge, you spoke about it, he spoke about it as well. There are others who have mentioned the way our current political climate is. Parliament, how things are turning out in that place. Now, an MP, beleaguered, is going to be prosecuted for acts that perhaps the state has clear evidence about. And yet the opposition says you are doing so because you want to reduce our numbers. Of course, the timing makes it questionable. To what extent do these things give any semblance of what is happening anywhere else to make Ghana also susceptible to anything like that? Even though, as I said last week, I doubt very much that Ghana has not gone beyond this.
Samson, this goes way back. And let me just take it back to say what? 2019 or 2020? I mean, the process of the voter registration, the undue violence, the usage of arms by people who sought to manipulate the process, and then the behavior, the dangerous behavior between the 6th and the 7th of January 2021 that has basically been brushed under the carpet as if nothing has happened. And there were a few of us who were extremely disturbed, first about the military's incursion into Parliament, Parliament's unwillingness to investigate how that order was given, who was the leader, and then to bring it under control. Subsequent to that, we've seen a Parliament in which fisticuffs have become increasingly a replacement for the ability to debate, to argue, and present facts in a manner that convinces the other. That has led to a partisanship in which the interest of the generality of the Ghanaian public is no more important. That the tensions in Parliament are beginning to trickle down into society. That becomes dangerous, and we need to pull back from the brink. Precisely because when you get into Parliament, much as you are interested in focusing on your party's politics, the generality of the interest of the Ghanaian populace is what must drive us. Ghana Incorporated is what must become the central fulcrum around which our politics, our security, our development must manifest itself. Right. Let's bring Ghana back into the center of what we do. And I can assure you, we will be able to maintain the stability, deepen democracy, and then spread the development that we are looking for. I'm always very optimistic, but brutally optimistic, and always very hopeful.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwesi Enin and Professor Kojo Appiagyei. Now, the president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, chair of the authority, last week in his opening statement to his colleagues said that no country was immune from this kind of development. And as I mentioned, reading all the analysis around the place, you find that Ghana is isolated, Nigeria is isolated, and I seem to want to think that we are beyond this. And yet some of these experts continue to say that don't be overly optimistic. Is there anything that you see beyond the causes that we know may be similar? That is the issue of youth unemployment. But so far, wherever these coups have happened, the question is not youth unemployment. Please unmute.
Sorry. Yes, the youth unemployment issue is there, but looking at the speeches that are made by these coup makers, when they come to power, their focus has been on security. And so security seems to be the new catchword that seems to jive with the people's concerns. And I think that while that is true, certainly if you look at the situation in Burkina Faso, that they had a good reason to say that the soldiers were neglected, and therefore it allowed for the terrorists to run roughshod and cause that problem in Burkina Faso. But I think that we may be overblowing the security problem as a basis and reason for military to come to power. There are equally other important problems that confront the country or the West African sub-region, if not the whole of Africa. And the problem comes down to how we let our institutions work. We are talking about a situation where there is the important need for collective action, and ECOWAS is well placed to play this role. And ECOWAS should move away from just condemning coup d'etat to actually examining the other elements that I mentioned, which are key, so that, because for example, if you look at the Lomé Declaration, there's some defects in there. The defect is that where there is a coup d'etat, we see clearly that when the ECOWAS makes a statement, it just says return the country to constitutional rule. It doesn't talk about the place of the government that has been overthrown, whether it should be given the space to come back to power. It was only the case of Kaba in Sierra Leone and I think Comoros, where the AU and ECOWAS flexed their muscles and made sure that the overthrown government was returned to power. In most cases, if you are out of power, you are out of the picture. They only ask about your health and the fact that you should be released from office. But that should not be the basis. In international law, there's dual recognition of the government that has been overthrown and recognition of the government that has taken power illegally or unconstitutionally. And so there's a wait and see approach to see if there's and this is the time where you need to assess what the government actually did, whether there's justification for the coup d'etat.
Okay.
And that and acquire wealth for itself, or truly they are for the people. If they are for the people, the moment a coup d'etat is orchestrated, they hand over to the people, back to the people.
Okay.
And they support the people to be able to ensure that forward and make sure that there is democracy that we are talking about can work.
All right. Thank you so very much, Professor Kwadwo Appiah-Tia is Associate Professor of Law at the University of Ghana. He has an eye on the AU and ECOWAS, so he's been assisting us with their protocols and treaties and how they should be dealt with to avoid this ugly development happening sweeping across the sub-region, more particularly. Adam Agai, Senegalese author and former ECOWAS Communication Director, also joined us. He himself says he's a victim of repressive regimes and autocratic conduct, particularly stifling of the freedom of expression, of speech, and of the press. Professor Kwesi Enin is Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. We will take a break and return to find out where political parties and politicians have been getting the money that they clearly don't make, that they can't point you to their accumulation through salary or by some work to get to conduct an election and win. We'll be right back.
We identify funding to them who were engaged, who were allegedly engaged in illicit activities and funding the money back. And these financiers were engaged in illegal mining, galamsey. Ever wonder why it's so difficult, particularly in the oil city?
People who have given you T-shirts and money and all kinds of things, and now you are dealing with them. It was almost unconscionable, but it had to be done. And in the process, some of us almost lost our lives, because then the pressures within and without, because you are cutting off the source of funding for both parties. They will come after you. So we have created a system that legitimizes and institutionalizes the corruption. And at the same time, we say we want to deal with the corruption. The solution is to deal with the system. When you deal with the system, then you no longer will have this awkward situation where you go and collect money from the person. When you come into power, then you have to investigate the person or pretend to investigate the person, whichever way it is. So one party will talk about it. When they come, check all the corruption-related cases, from boss to whatever. Check. It's linked to campaign financing. There's always a financier there. Why you think we are foolish people? Why is it that sometimes you ask yourself about which sensible person will sign this contract or will agree to this deal? Haven't you asked yourself that question? It's because our hands are tied.
That's Elvis Efriankra, Director of Elections at the MDC, being very forthright and getting hated for being as plain as he was on that occasion. My guest, Mary Awalana Ada, is Programs Manager, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Peter McMenu, former National Chairman of the NPP, a formidable elections person, observing elections and working on elections on the continent and the globe. We also have Siedu Nketia, who is the General Secretary of the NDC. Godfred Esiama is Research Analyst of the CDD. Gilfred Esiama is Research Analyst with the CDD. Thank you also very much. Let me start very briefly with Gilfred. What prompted this research, and what does the result exactly say? Hello, Mr. Esiama, please unmute.
Yes.
Yes, let's hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. We at CDD Ghana, as we call ourselves, we are partisans of democracy. So we are interested in key issues that confront our democracy. And as all of us know, political parties are fundamental to every democracy across the world. They carry the aspirations and wishes of the people. They mobilize people. They present options. And as at now, we haven't identified any alternative to political parties when it comes to the practice of multi-party elections. So in 2004, 2016, and the recent study that we have done, we have examined issues concerning political party financing in Ghana. And it is largely so because politicians and political parties need funds to execute the activities that they do, mobilizing, providing education, canvassing for vote. The one key thing about the financing of political parties is that if it's not regulated, if you don't take extra care, it undermines the essence of democracy for which political parties exist. If you don't take care, organized interest will influence the funding of political parties and candidates and capture the interest, the policies and the outcomes that when parties come into power, they implement. So that is one. Again, as we have learned over the years, political party funding is somewhat linked to corruption. So when people come to power, they have to give contracts they have to pay back what people provided to them. And this is not just to mean that all political funding or campaign financing is riddled with corruption. There are some legitimate expenditure that politicians also have to deal with. And we have observed over the years the increasing cost of elections, right from 2016 study that we did, and some pronouncement by key political figures in our country expressing concern generally about the excessive monetization in our political environment.
So how do you come to the estimate that to have a successful presidential campaign, you need in excess of about 575 million Ghana cedis? That's $100 million. And if you want to be a parliamentary, if you want to go to parliament, you need to spend about 4 million Ghana cedis to be able to do that. How did you come about that?
Well, as we have indicated in our report, for the estimation for the presidential candidates, we didn't do a breakdown of the figure, but this figure has been mentioned and validated by politicians in the various engagement that we had with them in the course of the study, various validation sessions. And it's not surprising. We can even think about the activities that go into being contesting for political office as a president. For the parliamentary side, we have done research over the years, way back in 2016, know the cost, printing T-shirts, organizing rallies, and a lot. And even in the 2020, the study that we did, some candidates were spending 600,000 cedis just a short period before primaries and during the primaries. And some had to pay health insurance, 600 cedis per person. They had to pay rent for people. They had to pay school fees. If you are paying school fees, 2,300 cedis for about 50 university students, all because you want to nurture a constituency, you can estimate the amount of money that is involved. And we estimated that 2 million of the 4 million cedis goes into nurturing the constituency to succeeding at the primaries before you go back to contest for the main elections and post-election activities, Thanksgiving, organizing parties for party faithfuls and the sympathizers across. If you wouldn't mind, I wanted to give you just a recent example. Mr. JoyNews, who has expressed interest in Awutu Senya West. If you go back, just go back some few years ago, you can see the activities he's been doing, the kind of money he's putting into this. About 500 or so party delegates that he shared piece of cloth with and donated some unspecified amount of money as captured in the media. He proceeded to Awutu Bojerase to meet a Muslim community. He made donations, and from there he went to former MP, a widow, made some donations. I have cited in the news, he is giving a 3-unit classroom block, and this man, because he's interested in the office, when they are going for primaries, he should be interested in who becomes executive. So there too, he has to be interested and some money has to go through. And you move from the executive to the delegate and all the cost that is involved. So when we talk about the cost, it is real, it is huge, printing of t-shirts and a lot of other things.
Right, except that I think presently what JoyNews is doing around his area there, I think it's about under a certain foundation for himself. So it will look like some charity work. We all know where it will end. But how do you come by the sources and is it just mere suspicion that some of the money is from illicit sources, including Galamsey? Did you go to the Electoral Commission to find out? Because according to law, these parties are required to file a report within 6 months from the 31st of December of each year, detailing the following. They are supposed to detail the state of their accounts, sources of funds, sources of the funds that they talk about, members' dues paid, contributions and donations, their assets, and audited accounts for the year. According to Section 30, subsection 3 of the Political Parties Act, if you contravene this law, it attracts a fine from any amount to a maximum of 10 million penalty units. That is 120 million Ghana cedis, or 2 years imprisonment, or both. The fine and the imprisonment upon conviction. So you went to the EC and they gave you, and you realized that this is some of the sources of the funding?
Well, Samson, that's very interesting. The amount of money that goes to the political parties is quite insignificant when you talk about the total pool that one needs to mobilize for to fund their campaigns. And I'm sure the politicians are here, they will tell you membership contribution is so insignificant. We did some deck study and it ranked third. It was one of the least sources of funding for political candidates and even the party. And again, just to note that huge sums of money does not pass through the political party, and it goes through the individual candidates and people around the candidates. So they become the major source. They crowd this source of funding. So if you run through the political parties, they may present something to you, but I'm sure you will miss a lot out of it. So that is one. The second issue, and again, the law that you read required only political parties and not candidates, but the candidates are the ones who mobilize these resources. So that is one. Two, did we, was it a mere allegation? No, it wasn't a mere allegation. We have stated the steps we used to arrive at these 9 people who are engaged in illicit funding. One, we identified informants in the 4 regions that we did a study. These people came out with a list of party financiers. From there, we sent researchers to the field to also generate lists using a snowball method to generate some lists. After that, we had to compare the 2 lists and identify people who appeared in both lists. When we finished, we also got party informants, 40 interviews, just to go through and understand these processes and the people that had been identified as major financiers. And when we talk about major financiers, we are talking about people who had donated about 100,000 cedis and over to the campaign of political candidates or political parties. So we went through all these mechanisms just to check the reliability and integrity of the information that we got. And again, from this pool of 53, which we did some analysis about, we followed up with 12 interviews with some of them, 12 people. And from this analysis, 53, we got to understand that 9 people, where you have 7 directly engaged in illegal mining, that is Galamsey, as you all know. 1 person was involved in oil diversion. We did our checks to ascertain that 1 person was also involved in fraudulent business. And I can't mention names yet, but if I were to mention names, I doubt if you would be surprised, knowing the kind of things you also know about politics.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. But hold on for us, just in case the politicians we are speaking to and party managers and candidate managers we are speaking to have a question or two for you. So let me take a first brief comment from Mary from the CDD. I said the CDD, the Ghana Integrity Initiative. What do you say? Reading and looking at the reports, what are your comments from where you sit?
Good morning, Samson. And let me say good morning to Gilfred and the other panelists. And good morning to your cherished viewers. It is not surprising I'm saying so because the Ghana Integrity Initiative with CDD and the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition have done some work in the past on electoral corruption and generally abuse of incumbency, and we've done it over the years during our elections. We also have an appreciation of the fact that the politicians or people who want to be elected into political office take advantage of the several gaps in our law to ensure that they do things for their benefit. Again, our studies over the past have indicated that the demand side of corruption is increasingly becoming prominent and proactive. Citizens are asking for their due because they know that the national cake will not be distributed as they wish. They would not get their development projects when these politicians come into power. And so they begin to demand them in the TVs and in the motorcycles, the bicycles, and other things that they distribute. And so corruption has become an unfortunately great part of our electoral process. And now CDD has added on the fact that some of the financiers who are brought to bear, or who most of our politicians engage to solicit funds from, also engage in illicit activities. That is unfortunate, but that is the reality with which we live as a people. And we believe that we need to begin to interrogate some of these processes and ask, do the political parties do any due diligence when it comes to the money they are receiving from the funders or the donors who give them money? Because we cannot just go out there and say, I am taking money from this person and I do not know anything they do. I am very sure that in other dispensations, this would not be accepted, and people who accept such monies would be called to accountability. Unfortunately, our accountability processes are not as effective as they should be. And so we see the supply side of corruption seriously engage in the act. And per the reports that I read, you realize they give some very flimsy excuses as to they want to remain friends with both and so that their businesses are not affected. Some say they want to remain in business. Others will tell you they want to continue to make profits. And others clearly indicate that if they do not do it, they would be vilified. And that is very informative. And our political parties and the very prominent persons who are leading these processes should bow their heads in shame, because we are saying that we are throwing competition to the dogs. We are saying that we are making our procurement processes so very not competitive and allowing people who are the highest bidders to gain from what they are putting into their campaigns. And this has been justified by the video you played, and the person clearly saying that what do you expect? If the person helps you, then it means hand go, hand come. And so we should justify such processes. Unfortunately, some of us cannot and will not understand, and we cannot comprehend how in a system where we are talking of fairness and equity, we are agreeing and accepting that as a society, we are putting aside the rules and allowing corruption to pervade.
All right. Let me go to Peter McMenu now. Thank you very much for making the time to join us, sir. First, I'd like to check with you. Do you think that Elvis Afriyankra, when he spoke about this a couple of years ago, was being forthright or he was not? And a portion of what he said that check all the corruption-related cases from the boss to whatever. Check it is linked to campaign financing. There is always a financier there. Why? You think we are foolish people? Why is it that sometimes you ask yourself that which sensible person will sign this contract or will agree to this deal? Have you asked yourself that question? It is because our hands are tied. You agree with him?
Samson, good morning, and good morning to your esteemed viewers. I think that campaigning involves monetary expenditure as part of it. Political parties in Ghana are constrained by a lot of actions and inactions, legal, institutional, and others that sort of tied us when it is time for campaigning on how to raise funds legitimately. So raising the funds itself is one thing, and the source of the funding, which is questionable most of the time, because if you are asking for funding, you are not going to probe where the person is going to. You will send either a letter, a telephone, whisper a message about an activity, a campaign activity that you are going to perform in a region, a constituency, or an advertisement in a media house that you are supposed to carry. So if you need these kind of expenditures, you are not going to go beyond where the person is going to get the money from. But from your own estimation, he is somebody who has interest in your party. He is a party member or a party loyalist. And from what you perceive, he has that extra income to donate to the party. So I think that CDD has done a good job. We need to look at the existing laws in the Political Parties Act 574 and look at how we can reform it such that when the sources of funds are shown, Ghanaians can have access to know that ABC contributed this kind of money to Party A or Party B. So the nature of reforms that we should take, and I agree with many of the reforms suggested by the CDD booklet on short, medium, and long term. We should be looking at institutions like Electoral Commission, like financial statement reading, that is bringing in professionals like the audit service to help the Electoral Commission, and education, getting the political parties themselves to also accept that what we are doing is not the best for our nascent democracy. So I agree with Elvis. We have come a long way since 1992 and even before 92, but the cost seems to be rising. And when the costs are rising, you will look for avenues of filling in the gaps in the cost. Now, there are so many media houses you want to attract to beef up your campaign. Now, there are a lot of one-on-one campaign, and that costs more money. Now, the voters would like to be sensitized digitally, and it costs money to do that. So, political campaign expenditures itself are going up. But there is a caveat, something I think I'd like to add is, CDD itself, in 2020, did a survey, and one of the outcomes of that survey is that respondents said they will take your money, but they will not necessarily vote for you. So we should not take the Ghanaian voters for granted that because you go and look for money and give it to them, they are going to vote for you. No.
All right.
And some, you are aware that we live in a country where, particularly in our own internal elections, some people haven't lost, have tried to chase delegates for their monies or their TV sets or whatever.
That's right.
So it does not necessarily translate to election victory, and we must be very much aware.
Interesting. Interesting. Johnson Asiedu Nketia of the NDC, General Secretary, joins us. Thank you very much. And just as Peter McMenu said, you also said that it is only perhaps later, after you have been successful, that you get to know the background and the source of the money that you may have received. How so?
Very much, Samson. Let me say a very big good morning to listeners. And let me also begin with a disclaimer, and that I'm speaking to you. It is true, I'm the General Secretary of the National Democratic Congress, but I'm speaking to you as someone. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Someone that, yeah, I'm speaking to you as someone that has researched the subject of corruption in Ghana for my master's degree.
Okay.
And so, not all the views I express here not necessarily as Secretary of the National Democratic Congress.
Okay, please pardon me. Pardon me. Let's do this. We want to rather call you on the phone. Your internet is not the best, so we want to rather call you on the phone so that we can have a better connection to you. That's Johnson Asiedu Nketia. He says he prefers to speak in his private and personal capacity rather than the corporate person that he is as the General Secretary of the NDC, and again also because he did his master's degree doing a project on corruption within in party financing. So we will get his views shortly about that. I want you to also remember, I may read a portion of the sole commissioner of judgment debts, Justice Yao Apao. A part of his report, President Mills commissioned him to look at judgment debts, inordinate judgment debts, and why this country was plunged into paying millions of dollars in judgment debt. And when he finished his work, part of the recommendation was to think critically and seriously about political party funding, because it's obvious to many of us that contributes largely to the unconscionable judgment debts that we see. So people literally deliberately just fleece the country in the name of judgment debts so that they can build a war chest to conduct an election. Interesting. Is Johnson Asiedu Nketia back on the line? Okay. We're trying to reestablish contact with him on phone because his line was not the best. Let's hear him. He has spoken to us earlier. He spoke to us earlier. So let's hear Johnson Asiedu Nketia's initial response when the survey was announced.
I don't know whether I'll be able to actually say with some certainty, because nobody comes to offer funding and tells you that I'm engaging. And usually that is what they will be doing. It is only when you come to power that somebody will come and say that, well, this person, this business, help us with it and so on. So nobody will come and disclose that I kill human beings, or I'm a terrorist, so I'm coming to finance your party. Nobody will accept that type of.
Right. So please, let's hear you continue with your submission.
Yes. And from the research that I did, it became clear that there is some illicit funding of political parties or political party candidates. And it also emerged that those who want to fund political parties from illicit business will not disclose to the political parties their source of funding or the candidate the source of funding. Indeed, if you are a candidate and you are in financial distress and you have somebody coming up saying that, well, I believe in your vision, so I want to fund you this much, without telling you where his source of income is coming from, it is most unlikely for that distressed candidate to be asking you where your monies are coming from. But when you win and the demands begin emerging from your financier, that is where you realize that the type of business is engaged in. And so we should not hide our heads in the sand like the proverbial ostrich and say that all is well with our political funding. Our democracy is daily getting endangered because of source of funding. And I associate myself with what Elvis has said earlier on, that political funding is a major root cause of corruption. And the earlier we exposed and confronted it and dealt with it, the better it will be for our democracy.
From where you sit, is it worse now than before? Because many people think that when you were campaigning to go to Parliament and you went to Parliament, during those days, the times that Hackman, Owusu Ajima and Dems, your group and before, the system was not as monetized as it is now. What do you say to that?
That is true. For every passing election, the system becomes more monetized. That is why I am scared that unless we as a country find a way of pulling the brakes, our democracy will be heading towards doom. For every passing election, monetization becomes worse. And things that were unheard of in previous elections gradually become the norm. Because in the 92s, thereabouts, you wouldn't hear about campaign of delegates. In fact, when it gets to internal party elections, you wouldn't hear about campaign of delegates and giving monies and so on. We've now far gotten past that one, and it appears that campaign of delegates and giving them envelopes has become a norm, and people are openly discussing these things on air to the extent that those who give envelopes and they end up not being voted for come openly to demand back their money. I think that we are getting, the situation is getting out of hand.
Right.
And something must be done about it. If we want to do something about it, we must first define what is allowed as legitimate activity for the soliciting of votes. I agree with Peter that it costs money to campaign. But not all that cost is coming from just the cost of living in the country. We are adding things and making them a normal part of campaigning, which should not be part of campaigning. If you are going to campaign and previously you were not buying bicycles, previously you were not buying motorbikes and cars and so on. And gradually you see that people started buying and distributing bicycles, which was not complained about. It upgraded into motorbicycles, and now it is cars that have been promised. Since when did this become part of our campaign? We should find a way of
Thank you. Thank you. Hold on briefly for me. Let me quickly get Peter McMahon to see if I can get a confirmation for this. And I remember when Peter McMahon, you were campaigning to lead your party. You had to go all over the country. Today, do you think that it has become worse as people are even going around for party positions? And the things we see they do, the monies they offer and we get to hear about?
It's not the best. It's not good for our democracy. I believe that we should find ways, and that's why I commend CDD for this project. We should find ways of curtailing the escalating cost and monetization of our elections, both internal and general elections. So people are spending money, and ultimately, when power comes to them, they have to pay back. I know some MPs who are still indebted to their financiers one way or the other. So if they don't find contracts or corrupt means to pay them back, they're not going to be steady working in Parliament House. They will be sitting in Parliament House, but their mindsets will be tuned elsewhere. So we must find a way of reducing the cost of elections in this country. That's the first thing.
Yeah, you had mentioned finding a way earlier, and you mentioned even the electoral laws, what to do about them. I said Dunketia also, resource to the same things, what we need to do. But what exactly are you saying can be done? At the level of the parties, you decided to expand your electoral college base for internal elections. And that was supposed to be part of the process of removing money. But has that done the magic yet?
It will do the magic because we haven't reached there yet. NDC made an attempt by bringing on board every card-bearing member. But you see, you need the right infrastructure to be able to achieve that in a better managed way. So we started with the polling station executives 55555. There are concerns that we should increase it to every card-bearing member, which is something NDC did and it failed. But to do that, you need certain amount of infrastructure on party membership, how updated they are, payment of their dues, where are they located, can there be any unique identity to identify them? So we are in the mood of doing all this. And it won't be long. Our membership base will be technologically linked and we'll be able to identify. Then we will say we have the infrastructure to carry on this kind of assignment where every card-bearing member will be brought on board. And when that is done, it will be difficult for people to pay monies to that size of
what's your specific recommendation as to legislative approach to reducing this situation, particularly when it comes to funding campaigns?
I think one, the length of our campaign periods must be shortened, and it must be decisive that 2 months, 3 months should be the campaign period. Because in our country, Ghana, we don't have any laws on campaign periods, and people campaign throughout the years, etc. But in other African countries, you go to Kenya, Nigeria, it's 3 months, 2 months. So we must change the law, either the constitutional instrument or any act of parliament, to define the time frame for the elections. And I'm happy that some time back, Ghana Bar Association made this suggestion that campaign period should be limited to a certain amount of time so that when elections are over, at least people can have their peace of mind and the expenditures will be limited to that kind of period. Then there should also be a reform or a law on the filing of political parties' end of year or post-election expenditure and revenue accounts. They should widen it and make it more public, more transparent, and name people who contributed to a candidate and a party. It should not be limited to a party alone. It should be both a candidate and a party, so that at the end of the day, we'll be able to know where the monies came from and what they were used for. It's important that we are able to do this to bring some more transparency into the conduct of our elections and campaign finance.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sedunketia, you have said that there's a need to retweak the law. So what are your specific interventions you are looking at? Do you agree with Peter McMahon when he begins with the reform of the filing of the political party accounts to include candidates? Because presently, what you file is only for the parties. And the Electoral Commission, I doubt, does anything beyond what you decide to declare.
Thank you very much. I agree with Peter on many of the things he has suggested, but I want to go further. We need, for instance, we need to compel the candidate to also disclose. Because the irony of this rising political funding cost vis-a-vis the requirement for political parties to disclose, the amount of money spent, is that the bulk of the funding is done directly by the candidate to whom they choose, without passing the funding through the structures or the accounts of the political party. So sitting at headquarters in Accra, I'm not in a position to know how much the NDC candidate in Kwasimintin, for instance, is spending in his campaign and what he's spending the money on. Much the same way when it comes to presidential campaigns, it is the same. No presidential candidate channels his campaign funding through the political party. So at the end of the year, the parties are able to disclose what amount of money pass through their accounts, and they cover dues and contributions and donations that are done to the party as a party. But mind you, if any big donor wants to contribute to the party, he wants to do it through the person who becomes the president or the MP, because he is the individual whom he will be relying on for subsequent favors and so on. So if the laws about disclosure is just compelling political parties to file accounts, then a lot of the funding will go undisclosed. So that is why Peter is making that suggestion. But I want to add that even with the political party, the regulation is not done very well. But the Constitution mandates the Electoral Commission to organize elections, register people, and so on. There is nowhere in the Constitution where the duty of regulating political parties is imposed on the Electoral Commission. And that is why we have suggested that before you can have the activity of regulating political parties properly in place, it should not play second fiddle to the conduct of elections. We must have an office, the regulator of political parties, that will follow up on their accounts. Even make sure that the disclosures that are made in the final account actually represent reality. And they can check the source of funding and all others. That is why we have made that,
Briefly, can you tell us how far, what progress has been made on that particular recommendation for reform that you made to the Electoral Commission? We have heard significant persons in the NPP support that, and also democracy watchers also support that the EC needs to be decoupled. Its functions need to be decoupled so that it doesn't take this function on as well. Because already, as the history will show, it has failed terribly in that regard.
Unfortunately, the progress so far is zero. The Electoral Commission has not taken any step. The Attorney General has not proposed any new legislation in that regard, and nothing is happening, unfortunately. Nothing is happening. But the other suggestion I would want to strongly canvass.
Yes, finally.
Canvassing for all these years is some state funding of the activities of political parties. You know, when you ask yourself, how come that when a party is in government, then donations flow freely from left, right, center, and the party is able to do many things? And immediately the party goes out of power, those donations are then diverted to parties that are in power. It tells you that the donors benefit something from a party which forms a government. And so we cannot close our eyes to this.
All right.
Let us open it up. The state will fund one political party or the other through the back door anyway. So why can't we open up and accept the type of funding of a political party that the state can accommodate? For instance, something that comes in easily is the state taking up the cost of internal elections of a political party. The reason why we could not pursue this our universal membership suffrage for our internal elections, which we believe would be a panacea to cure corruption within the internal party elections, was that the membership suffrage, full membership suffrage, comes along with cost, because you are calling on the party members to cast their votes where they will be casting their votes regularly in a general election. The implication is that you are deploying the staff of Electoral Commission across the country as if you are engaged in a general election. And then, unfortunately, the state picks up the bill when it is general election. But when it is an internal party election and you are deployed across the country so as to limit corruption, the Electoral Commission will call on the political party to bear the cost. So the exercise we did prior to the 2016 election was so costly. The amount we ended up paying to the Electoral Commission for the staff deployed cannot be borne by a small political party.
All right.
So if there is an arrangement where the Electoral Commission will be deployed to facilitate the holding of internal party elections based on universal membership suffrage, then we can all move into that direction.
All right.
And it will let the possibility of people buying delegates and so on.
Thank you.
Perhaps we'll find some time and go into
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johnson Esedun Ketia. And let me get just 1 minute final comment from Peter McMahon on the state funding issue also, because you all talk about it only when you are in opposition. We know, for example, when the NPP was in opposition for quite a long time, how it was difficult for you to even organize your congresses, and you had to be begging your members to finance it. Sometimes it wasn't working. I think there was one occasion it took your presidential candidate, to look for the money. Otherwise, you couldn't have had a Congress.
Yes, thank you, Samson. I think Johnson knows that we have come together with all the political parties under the banner of the Ghana Political Parties Program, GPP, to recommend to the Electoral Commission under Dr. Kojo Afarijan that they should consider some form of legislation that would get the state to fund political parties. We have done that very long ago. It's in the shelves of the Electoral Commission. And I quite remember that when under the Ghana Political Parties Program, the NDC under the late Dr. Kwabena Adjei and myself were on the same platform called the Chairman's Caucus. We made the same suggestions. So it is not new. We should be bringing it to the front burner so that more action is taken on it. So I favor funding of political parties.
All right.
After all, currently, the fees that the Electoral Commission takes, they pay back to parties that get a certain level of votes. I think it's 25% for parliamentary and 12.5% for presidential. So there should be a methodology where people cannot just walk in and take the money because it's a political party.
All right.
But the method of getting the money, the EC and state organizations like the Auditor General, etc., can come in and ensure that you work as a party. We are able to ascertain the cost of the work you did before the nation can fund that expenditure.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter McMahon. Let's get just a minute each from the CDD and also from the GII. So, Mr. Asiamah, what will you say, having listened to these two big political parties that are responsible for the rot as far as the issue of the corruption in the through political party funding is concerned? Having listened to them, what do you have to say? Please unmute your mic.
We are having a very honest conversations, and as you can see from both sides, they agree on the issues. We are thinking about the way forward, which we have proposed, and they have embraced it. We are constituting a multi-stakeholder working group to look at some of these proposals and draw a roadmap on how we should finance political parties in this country. Issues about public funding is okay, but it's about what should we fund, when and how. And I think all those issues will be considered. And again, the last one is that I think we need to also state clearly, explicitly, that illicit funding is not allowed. This is to give additional responsibility to candidates to double check the funding that they receive, and also make it more risky for the people who are engaged in these illicit activities who tend to finance political parties. So we are going ahead with these proposals, and we hope that we will come out with something very important for reforms.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, Mary. In a minute, CDD, you just had a meeting this week to re-strategize on how to, improve the corruption fight, because people are getting fatigued, because as we know, it's becoming rationalized. There's a normalization of corruption in the country.
Exactly, and so that is why for me, let me also say it's heartwarming to hear the politicians all agree for the first time for me on this particular matter, that they are all complicit when it comes to political party financing and how they raise their resources. And they appreciate as well that some of the sources of the funding is actually not clean. What I would say to conclude, and for a fact that people are really getting tired of us speaking and of the political rhetoric, which has also been manifested here today. People accepting, but they're not doing much to change the situation. For me, I believe that for any impact we make going forward, we need to change this situation. And the fact remains that charity only begins at home. If the political parties begin to disqualify candidates who go out there publicly trying to influence the process, who go out there soliciting illegal funds, then people would be in a way let's say, dissuaded from pursuing such paths in the future.
All right.
But until then, the citizen who sees that the only way for his pocket to be better is that during elections, he would get some goodies from the people who come to him, because he will not get any social development in his community.
Thank you.
They would continue to do so.
Thank you very much, Mary Awalana Ada is Programs Manager, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Interesting, though, that you want the parties to begin to take these actions when at the top they are actually involved. They say they don't examine your source of funding, but they know, we know. For example, the people that CDD has identified as those who are engaged in illicit acts. Why? Don't we know in this country what these people are involved in? It's no secret. Peter McMahon is former national chairman of the NPP. Johnson Esiedun Ketia is General Secretary of the NDC. Gilfred Esiama is research analyst with the CDD. Can we have the Electoral Commission at least crack the whip just for a little while on what the law requires, and let's see what we get before we look at all these things that are being proposed? We'll be right back on e-levy. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. It's brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. Waylead Properties, home is where one starts. DBS Industries, we truly are your roof expert. CBG, we stand with you. Fabrimental, your partner in steel. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. The Barstow School, start here, go everywhere. Rehoboth Properties, quality housing for all. So, you know, the e-levy has become almost like an albatross around the place. I don't know whose neck it is on. So let's look at it again. It does appear, people suggest that the government is being slow now, but it's a calculative, slowness, deliberate, to be able to gain certain, ground before it puts it up in Parliament to be able to avoid what is threatened. Joining us this morning for this segment, Felix Ofosu-Kwakye is former Deputy Communications Minister and Special Aide to President Mahama. Andrew Ejapa-Mensah is Deputy Minister, Energy Ministry. And Godfred Bokwin is Professor of Economics, University of Ghana. Bright Simmons, Vice President, Imani Africa. Now, whilst because of we're just waking up to the Moody's downgrade and other matters where the World Bank is also saying a few things, and we are getting to know the quantum of money that has come through the IMF and the World Bank to our country for the fight of COVID-19, which is blamed for all the problems. I want to do it this way. Let me speak to these two politicians briefly before I go to Godfred, Bryce Simmons and Godfred. So, Mr. Mensah, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great. Yeah, so you were at the forum and you were doing everything to convince the people that we needed the e-levy. Do you realize how difficult it's becoming for you to convince people about this? Or you see it differently?
Well, let me say good morning to my colleague panelists and to your cherished viewers and listeners. I don't think that it's been difficult to convince people at all. I'm sure that you followed the processes and events that preceded the laying of the budget and events thereafter. There was a lot of misinformation that was thrown out there. And so it's important that government ordinarily would have gone out after the approval and the passage of the law to engage stakeholders before implementation. But we still have had to go nonetheless at this point because of the misinformation and the propaganda, mainly to, as it were, try and get people to appreciate the facts, the issues that confront us as a nation, and to solicit their support to enable us to proceed. In your intro, you indicated that we tend to indicate that COVID-19 is to be blamed for all our woes. I don't think that that is the case at all. We have consistently maintained that the financial sector cleanup cost that was incurred, okay, the energy sector payments that were incurred were all funded through debt. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hit, and that has compounded the issues that confront us. So it cannot be the case that government is attributing the situation that we find ourselves in today only to COVID-19. We gave some background underlying issues that were confronting the economy before COVID-19 also hit. So I think that's important that we put it in proper perspective so we are all clear with what it is that we are talking about.
Are you scared you get it thrown out of Parliament and that's why you have been slow in putting it up?
Not at all, of course. I mean, every policy that you roll out, depending on the reception or the way and manner with which it is twisted within the political fray, you ought to strategize and to then solicit the support of the greater majority of the people. I do not expect unanimity at all because our friends on the other side have indicated quite clearly their opposition to the bill. I do not expect them, of course, if they come around and see eye to eye with government and appreciate the challenge that we face today, some of which can be attributed directly to their mismanagement of our economy, okay, then we can together as a nation find a way to raise the requisite revenue, cut expenditure, and do all the things that we know when we go to IMF we are asked to do. And so I think that we ordinarily should be able to pass the bill, but government took the position that let's engage, okay, and try and bring as many people as we can.
So presently you are speaking to people, you are explaining to people, not consulting them, right?
Of course, it is through the engagement that the Ministry of Finance has signaled a reduction of the rate from 1.75 to 1.50. And so we are explaining and also listening, taking feedback and responding to same as appropriate.
Yeah, we were told before that you had consulted extensively, you had done an extensive survey and the results were positive. Now, general surveys done by almost any media house, any entity brings a result that is contrary to what government wants people to believe. You don't think so?
Well, I disagree, of course. I've seen some survey unscientific that has been put out by several media platforms, okay? And largely because of the spin and, of course, the misinformation, the downright falsehood that was attributed to the incidence of the imposition of the e-levy. That then shaped public opinion in a certain direction. But increasingly, as we go along and engage people, and people appreciate that, after all, what it is that we are talking about is 1 cedi 50 pesos, okay, levy on every 100 above the threshold that has been exempted. That is really what it comes down to. People tend to wonder that, oh, so really, is that what this is all about? Obviously, if you look at the tax net, and several people who are in the informal sector, okay, who then don't contribute to paying their portion of our development expenditure, would be brought in. And people appreciate that, well, you and I who are in the formal sector get to pay direct taxes. But how about the masons? How about the carpenters? How about the people who sell by the roadside who also earn significant income but do not pay any contribution? This levy, obviously not an end in itself, okay, because you will realize the government has consistently started a process of formalizing the economy through the digitalization agenda. But that process is not complete. Now we are confronted with a situation where we cannot continue to fund the deficit, okay, or the gap between our expenditure and our revenue through debt. And so government is embarking on this measure as another revenue handle to raise some additional funding, just so that we cannot go to the IMF, if you like.
Why are you completely against and rejecting the other sources of generating income, which actually politically some of your members say will not hurt you politically, because you don't need to take from all Ghanaians, so to speak? The extractive industry has been suggested that you could get in excess of, is it 20 billion US dollars from?
I don't think that is mutually exclusive at all. Of course, all those suggestions that are being put across require some work to be done to enable you bring all those revenues, assuming that it is true that there are leakages in that sector, into the tax bracket and into the consolidated fund.
Okay.
That process can still take place. Of course, the digitalization agenda that is looking ultimately to broaden the tax net is still ongoing. But government still has to fund the budget as approved by Parliament. And so it's important that the immediate, and people call it low-hanging fruits. I agree, of course. Everybody always make suggestions to the effect that tackle the low-hanging fruits before you can go on to do other measures that then will bring you additional revenue.
Okay.
So if we all agree that financial inclusion is good and that many people are using that platform to transact business, but then they proceed to say that that financial inclusion ought not go with some contribution from the users of that platform.
All right.
Then
now,
I have a little difficulty. So I think that this is
let's hear from the NDC. Let's hear from the NDC why they are also opposed completely, even to whatever reductions that may be proposed, because initially it was 1.75. Now the minister says 1.5. And the NDC says a complete no. You guys have suggested, and Imani has also suggested, things like cutting down the size of government. Whilst they are asking us to sort of tighten our belts, there are no signs that anything is being done on the side of government. And of course, this is the historic bloated government. We had in excess of 116 or plus ministers. And the president has, if you like, beat his own by reducing, but not beyond 100. Imani insists that you can deal with only 50. A V8 cost about 140,000 US dollars, right? So if you had all of that money, that's a lot of savings. So why at all don't you want to hear a reduction? Nothing. You just want zero e-levy.
Mr. Sampson, the truth of the matter is that this government wants an easy way out. They do not want to do the things that will sustainably ensure that we get out of the hole that they have plunged us in. Now, it is important to stress that the Ghanaian economy currently is hanging by a thread, and it is no exaggeration to say that it has already collapsed, because at the moment we are only going through the motions. This government is unable to do anything because of the hole that they themselves dug and have plunged us in. You see, as I speak to you, and you can verify this with the IMF, the rating agencies, and everybody else who has run commentary on the Ghanaian economy, the two things that have undermined this economy are an unsustainable debt overhang and a large budget deficit, both of which result from the decisions of this government. When we were living, it was laughable to hear Ejapa claim that they are suffering from the aftershocks of our so-called mismanagement of the economy. Now, on these two parameters, when we left office, our budget deficit was 6.1% of GDP. Our debt to GDP ratio was 56%. The total debt was 120 billion. What are the parameters today? Indeed, I have seen the December debt figures. It is 350 billion Ghana cedis. In fact, if you add some of the debt that they are hiding in state-owned agencies and very dodgy special purpose vehicles like ESLA, Dachi Bond, Sino Hydro, and what have you, our public debt should be 362 billion Ghana cedis. Our debt to GDP ratio, if you do central government accounting, should be 83% of GDP. Now, on what basis can anybody compare these two scenarios and say that what is happening today is a result of what happened yesterday? What simply happened is that this government believed that it needed to win elections at all costs. And so in 2020, they spent far beyond what we were capable of financing. And that is why they had a huge deficit of 15.2%. That is what has undermined us to this day. Now, because of this, we are having to use almost all of our revenue to do just three things. Debt servicing. This year, it will be 46 billion Ghana cedis. When you take that out and you take compensation of public workers, 37 billion Ghana cedis. And then statutory payments, which are rigid, that government cannot do anything about, 26 billion. You have 109 billion, which swallows up the entire 100.5 billion Ghana cedis that this government says it will realize this year, according to its own projections. Because of that, they don't have anything left to finance critical expenditure. As I speak to you, for 2 years, basic schools have not been given textbooks. Capitation grants have been in arrears for 4 tranches. Even the much vaunted free SHS is underfunded. And you notice that on the eve of Christmas, Charles issued a threat that if government does not make good its commitments, it will be compelled to close the schools and send the children home. Teacher trainees spent only 3 months out of 12 months last year in school because government could not find money to give them to run the schools. The District Assembly Commons Fund has been in arrears for 4 tranches, which is for 4 quarters, which is 1 year. Contractors are owed in excess of 20 billion Ghana cedis. Government cannot pay. Even NAPCO graduates have to endure a bitter Christmas because they are owed several months arrears. Teacher trainee and nursing trainee allowances are owed several months arrears. Lecturers are demanding pay increases that government cannot meet. The universities are not able to expand. So now there's a crisis in terms of accommodation. Now, this is reminiscent of a collapsed economy because there's a cash crunch which is self-inflicted. Now, the e-levy, which this government touts as the panacea to all our problems, is completely irrelevant as far as resolving the crisis we are in at the moment is. Now, let me tell you something from the budget. If you read...
We are funding a budget of 100 million.
Yes.
100.
No, our budget is actually 137 billion.
137.
Yes.
And e-levy is supposed to give us only 6 billion.
You see, government creates the impression that once the e-levy is passed, they will substantially plug the hole and they will need something little in order to be able to finance our development. That is not
I drew your attention to that because you said the e-levy is to solve everything.
That's what they are saying. But you see, what has actually happened now, the crisis we are in, is that this government does not have policy credibility. So investors do not want to touch us. In fact, they don't want to even lend us rotten nails or rusted nails in terms of financing or lending because they don't trust government's own projections. They don't trust that this government has managed the economy prudently. They don't trust that if they lend us money, we will be in any position to service it regularly as we should. And therefore, they are hedging. They have raised their yields or interest so that it is not sustainable for us to borrow. So we don't have access to the market. Now, the e-levy has been touted as the panacea to this problem. But you see something? Look at Appendix 232 and 233 of the 2022 budget. You see, government says that its financing for 2022, which is borrowing, will be 37 billion Ghana cedis. By 2025, this will go to around 29 billion Ghana cedis. Which means that even with the e-levy, government will still be borrowing. Now let me draw your attention to the foreign component, what they call the Euro bonds, green bonds, term bonds, and others. Now, this year, government projects that it will borrow 4.8 billion in terms of external and international bond market operations. By 2025, it will go to 15 billion Ghana cedis. Now, domestically, they will borrow 28 billion this year. By 2025, they will borrow 29 billion Ghana cedis. So government has programmed to borrow more, even as they collect the e-levy. So the e-levy will not resolve the problem. The problem that investors have with us is that they think that our operations, in terms of our fiscal operations, are not sustainable. There are rigidities that this government cannot overcome. And that is where the issue arises about the need for this government to cut expenditure. The Office of Government Machinery is receiving about 3.2 billion Ghana cedis. Over 500 billion Ghana cedis more, 500 million Ghana cedis more than they received last year. As I speak to you, our president likes to sit in the $14,000 an hour rented jet at a time when we have a presidential jet that is fit for purpose. How can you live like an Arabian king? You are neck deep in ostentation. You will not listen to cries and pleas from the people of Ghana to cut down on this expenditure. And you want them to pay e-levy, which essentially will be taxing people's savings and their capital. Because somebody goes to buy items from the market. The item he is going to buy already has VAT and other taxes inbuilt. Simply because he opts to pay electronically, you say he should pay additional taxation. Why? This government goes about claiming that it hated taxes in opposition. Meanwhile, since they've been in power, they've introduced over 23 different tax handles. People have endured this. There were no complaints. But people say that this e-levy is the last straw that has broken the camel's back. And you see, we are in deep crisis. That is why the rating agencies have downgraded us. If you read the commentary that follows Fitch's downgrade, and let me stress that Fitch has downgraded us. Yesterday, there was some propaganda by some MPP.
Yesterday was Moody's.
I'm saying that Fitch has downgraded us to B-. Our long-term credit rating is B- with a negative outlook. Some people claim that it was corrected. It is not true. It is on their website.
Moody's is with a positive outlook.
No, yes, but they've downgraded us to CAA1.
That's right.
Which, if you look at their scale, is very high credit risk. It is only 2 steps away from the lowest.
You're right. They explained that.
And this is the worst that we've seen. But you see, there's something. Yes, there's something I need to draw your attention to. You see,
30 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah.
The investor community does not have confidence in us. Because as I speak to you, there's already indication that we are beginning to default on some of our loans. Yesterday, I stumbled on information which shows that in 2020 and 2021, we paid 10 million Ghana cedis in punitive interest because we defaulted on some loans that we took. So this government is so tight that they don't know what to do. But instead of cutting expenditure and living within our means, they decide that they will foist pain and suffering on us for their own mismanagement of the economy.
Thank you. Now, let me go to Bright Simmons. And Bright, I've read your article, Ghana, a Nation of Tax Thieves. Very, very interesting. And the statistics you share there on the continent about the tax reluctance and the smaller numbers of people who pay tax and the rest of them. What do you say is the way to go other than e-levy? Because we have heard you make a brilliant presentation to us on this show about how to turn the economy around.
Samson, there is a slight production glitch in that I was told that what I'm supposed to talk about is whether or not IMF is an alternative to the e-levy.
It's part of the discussion. It's part of the discussion.
So am I allowed to proceed on that basis?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So I apologize that I have a presentation, but that was what the producer asked me to do. And in respect of that, the easy question is, what is it that we are looking to use e-levy for? The second issue is whether or not the government thinks this is temporary and is due entirely to COVID, or it's a structural problem. In answering one of both questions, the issue of whether or not IMF is a potential alternative is easier and more addressed. So first of all, we do have fiscal holes, and it's not just one hole. I think Mr. Fosu has made it very clear that it's not just a simple, small piece of the situation that we need to fill. We have a much more comprehensive challenge. And he's already pointed out that you need revenue about 137 billion. The government is already increasing taxes from 57 billion to 100 billion. So it's not as if e-levy is the only tax raise. They're trying to increase tax by 43% already. And then they want to borrow, in addition, about 30 billion besides e-levy. And e-levy is an extra 7 billion. So in some ways, e-levy is just one small part of the discussion. We also know that even if the government doesn't borrow externally, it intends to borrow significantly locally. And we have situations where the chart you are looking at on your top left hand is Cocoa Board's borrowing since 2011. You can see that it's grown from less than 1 billion Ghana cedis to 12 billion Ghana cedis last year. That's domestic borrowing. Typically, Cocoa Board borrows externally, but it's struggling to raise as much as it needs, and it's growing more and more. So we have a situation where we need money from everywhere we can grab our hands on. It's as simple as that. So in that respect, the question is whether or not IMF is a potential contributor to that. Part of the challenge, obviously, the fiscal debt, which now is back to mid-1970s level when we defaulted on our debt. So we have a very big problem on our hands. The question is, where do you find the money? You can go and borrow commercially. And if you borrow commercially, you can get around about 8%, rough. Nowadays, given our current circumstances, we'll get more above 10%. But I'm saying that on average, let's say 8%. Or you can go to IMF where either the interest rate is free or typically you get around 2%. And if you stay within your quota, normally you are giving maybe 185% above your quota or 200% above your quota. They have a certain way they determine the maximum you can borrow. It's only if you borrow above that maximum that you get surcharges. But even the surcharges will not take you to more than 4%, 3.5% thereabout. So in simple terms, IMF money is cheaper if all you are looking to do is to plug some of the 30-something billion hole that you have. That point is also that IMF doesn't charge the fees that will pay to all manner of investment banking actors in Europe and America, particularly in Europe, if we are doing a Euro bond. We pay millions of dollars in fees. From legal advisors to lead managers to rating agencies, etc. And of course, there are people in this country who have relationships there, and therefore, anytime we borrow, those relationships benefit. But obviously, we have to think of national interest. There's that point as well in terms of the cost of raising money on the commercial market. If the issue is rather that e-levy is just going to help the government project to investors that it's got fiscal consolidation under control and therefore be able to borrow at a better rate, that's a different debate. So that's not only talking about how we find money from anywhere to plug different sources, because what the government is looking to do is improve its credit rating. Well, the IMF doesn't have just one product. Its standard basic products, the conventional products, are about 10 of them. If you look at the top there, you see those that come primarily to assist countries that need quick adjustment. You find a group that we tend to qualify for, the EFF and the ECF, which usually is when you have protracted problems. And you have those where if you have an acute sudden problem and you just want some quick money, you go for the RFI and the RCF. We have already gone for the RCF. In fact, not only have we gone for the RCF, when the IMF then decided to increase quotas so that anybody in the world at all can also go get more money, we went there to get more money as well. So in short, there are different ways of borrowing from the IMF, not all of which come with conditionality. The RCF that we got last 2 years, for instance, didn't come with any conditionality. The quota disbursement that we got last year did not come with any conditionalities at all. Typically, if you get an RFI, the conditions are either non-existent or very minimal. And then you have some IMF products which are for countries that are performing very well, but need some overdraft. And tends to be countries with strong economies, and they borrow large amounts. Mexico borrowed about 50 billion of that, Chile about $27 billion out of that facility. And if it's those ones, then if we think our economy is really strong and this is just a temporary blip, then we can go for the FCL or the PLL. And those also have no conditions. The other point is also that when you borrow from the IMF, typically your commercial rates go down. So the concern that if we go for IMF money, we are then blocked from borrowing externally, it's not true. These are countries that took the FCL from the IMF, and you can see the effect that is had on their borrowing, sometimes to as much as about 1% of commercial borrowing because of the signal that the IMF sends to international investors. We can see the situation in Ghana in 2015, where because of doing so and other factors, we were going back to the IMF, we're going back to the international markets, and we're being asked to pay more than 10.75%. Then we went on an IMF program, and we managed to drop the cost of borrowing. Secondly, it also depends on how you negotiate. When you look at the countries that have borrowed during the COVID crisis, and you look at those that got money without condition, you can see that in some respects, most countries are able to get facilities without conditions if they negotiate strongly and effectively. The other thing is also that to get the more quality IMF products, your economy has to be in good shape. The FCL and the others, they don't give it to countries that are basket cases. So if you go to IMF, you are getting a bad deal. It's often because your economy is really bad, so they are giving you the EFF or the ECF and things like that. There are also countries where we've seen instances because of the epidemic, they've created new product like the catastrophe containment, but that is for typically very poor countries. And we may not qualify for that. So part of the big challenge is, what do you qualify for?
Okay.
So is this all just jargon? No. We have countries that have borrowed significant amount of money from the IMF without conditionality, using the right product. The RFI, for instance, Egypt got 2.7 billion. Egypt got 2.7 billion. South Africa got about 3.3 billion. None of that was based on any conditionality. And if you look at Kenya's borrowing costs, because of the fact that they still use concessional funding, which is not commercial funding, they get from the IMF, World Bank, and bilateral partners. Right. You can see that they've been able to drop how much they spend quite significantly.
Right.
Last point, we've always gone to the IMF many times. So this is not a solution to any structural problem. We've already gone to IMF about 16 times in our history. It has not changed the fundamentals of the economy. More importantly, based on the yield levy is that because we have a tax net that is extremely narrow, that is why we need to aggressively increase taxation, even though we already increased taxation by 43%. What this chart shows you is that Ghana actually has more taxpayers, given the size of its economy and the size of its population, than many of the countries we compare ourselves to, from Brazil, Kenya, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. The IMF has already provided 2 billion in the last 2 years. So an extra 1 billion from yield levy is not going to make much a difference. Sorry, I had to rush through, but that was the preparation I was told to make. Thank you.
Right. So from where you say it, we don't really have to be thinking about going. The government doesn't think it is necessary. The monies that have come in support of COVID prevention or COVID management, as you said, IMF has given a total of 2 billion, and then the World Bank has also given a certain amount, bringing the total, as I understand, to about, is it 15 billion Ghana cedis?
Samson, I'm not sure I understood your question. Are you saying that we've already got significant money from these multilateral bodies?
To sort of help our reserves?
Yes, I mean, that's the point I was making, that when we talk about the IMF issue, it's a bit, funny, because just over the last 2 years, we borrowed about 2 billion from them, right? None of them came with any conditions.
All right.
So when you hear consistently people talk about the fact that getting you out of an IMF program, it's an achievement. I'm trying to explain that there are different types of IMF programs. So we have to be clear which ones we are talking about. Right. In order for you to make the analysis whether or not you want to go to IMF or not. But more important point is that IMF is not a solution, given how much money we are looking to raise. Okay. And yield levy is not a solution also, because we have such a big hole and we have more structural problems. That's basically the summary of my analysis.
Thank you very much, Bright Simmons. Thank you for joining us. Now, let me go to Professor Bokping. Prof, you have been very categorical in suggesting that we don't need this e-levy in the first place, and that the economy is in trouble. So how do we support? As we hear from the finance minister, it happens everywhere. In times of need, the nation must be mobilized to help. Burden share.
Good morning, Samson, and good morning to cherished listeners and viewers, and good morning to other panelists on this show. I subscribe fully to Bryce Simmons' presentation. It's quite solid and sound. I think, is there anything else to say that this e-levy is not the way to go? Just after the government presented the budget, we're told that there had been extensive consultation and they had a buy-in of Ghanaians. You see, this is what we say: if you don't understand, if you don't do your policy formulation well, bearing in mind the reality and all of that, you run into some kind of lack of policy credibility. And then hurriedly, you told investors that you will get the e-levy passed at 1.75%. Now you have signaled to the market that you're going to withdraw this and bring it back at 1.5%. Fine. If they bring it to 0.5%, which perhaps we can forgive, I still don't think that is the way to go. And I'm sure you ask me that we have a problem. Is it a case that we just want the government to fail, and that's why we are preventing or saying e-levy is not the way to go? No, nobody loves this country more than we do. We love this republic. But I'll tell you where the solutions are, Samson. I want us to go to the 2019 State of the Nation address given by our own president. In that State of the Nation address, the president told us that the biggest threat to our domestic revenue mobilization strategy is exemptions. Samson, this was our own president. And I want to believe that this was born out of a rigorous analysis. And the president, to make matters serious for all of us, told us that if we don't do anything about it, if we continue at this rate, in less than 16 years, Ghana will give more than half of our revenue base away by way of exemptions. Samson, if you have a state, a government that came to this conclusion, and that government said that they had sent an exemption bill to Parliament to deal with it, and we are talking about 3 years or so, and nothing has happened about this. Look, in that State of the Nation address, the president told us that in 2018, we lost 4.66 billion Ghana cedis to just an aspect of exemptions, which has to do with import duty, import VAT, and all of that, excluding other exemptions. We are talking about 4.66 billion cedis. Per our own estimation, and an estimate exists across several think tanks, that we are losing annually more than $2.27 billion. And Samson, if you don't want to do anything about this, and your proposal is as though a salvation is an e-levy, is most unfortunate. E-levy is problematic on principle basis, and it's also problematic in terms of implementation. It defeats certain principles of taxation that is supposed to be an enabler to growth. Right now, look, Samson, and we don't hate this government. You know something? I believe that we have been more passionate with this government than probably Mohammed's government. Since COVID came, government has introduced sanitation levy. I'm sure you are aware.
That's right.
We let go. We have introduced COVID levy. All of that. In fact, we altered the VAT arrangement to some flat levies with no option of recoveries. If you put all those levies together, and together with COVID, sanitation, and all of that, please, is there not a limit? Is there not a threshold where you want to put the brake on taxation? Is it not contradictory to think that we can tax ourselves into wealth creation? This is look, you know, if you look at the consumption-based taxes and all of that, and if you add e-levy, it's counterproductive. And I'll tell you where I have a problem with this. We've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution predicated on network readiness and all of that. So now we are talking about a digital economy. Globally, the digital economy, even in 2016, was predicted to be worth over $11 trillion. The digital economy in Africa is worth over $300 billion by 2025. In fact, COVID has fast-tracked it and expanded it.
Right.
So the future is actually in the digital economy. So if you impose e-levy, which is to target one direction relative to the traditional economy that is cash-based, then that tells you that probably we are ignorant of where the world is heading towards.
Thank you, but sorry, I gave almost everybody some 7 minutes, and I'm cutting you at 6 minutes. In the next 2 minutes, Felix and Ejapamesa, starting with you, the issue about tax exemptions, we are told that we lose over 5 billion annually through tax exemptions. Is this one area the government is looking at, for example, to do something?
Samson, my understanding is that sometime in 2019, an exemptions bill was laid in Parliament. Obviously, the life of that Parliament died at the end of 2020, I believe, since January, without it passed. And so if government intends, and of course, if it presented a bill in the past, then every indication is that they intend to implement some reform in that space. And so I would expect that the Finance Ministry would resubmit that bill so that we can deal with it. But you see, some of the statements that is made, okay, that seems to paint some doomsday scenario. is a little worrying, because it cannot be the case that somebody is saying that e-levy is going to be the panacea to affluence. Indeed, when you look at the
finance minister, the finance minister doesn't say e-levy is the be-it-all and all. But some of your communicators, unfortunately, they are saying everything else. If you don't do e-levy, we can't have free SHS and the rest of them. So, Japan Minister, thank you very much.
Those expenditure items were not even included in the memorandum that was attached to the bill.
That's right.
And
thank
so
you.
We need to look at the document as
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we have run out. 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. Is the NDC organizing a demonstration, fix the country, all of you?
Well, our youth wing is organizing a demonstration. I'm sure in the coming days they'll put out more information. But this government has had 400 billion Ghana cedis in the last 6 years. The reason why we are in this hole is that they have mismanaged those resources. They have put us in a position where those who do business with that don't want to mind us. Look, it is not only those who lend us money who will be worried. Multilateral and bilateral agencies, the World Bank, IMF, AFDB, countries that lend us money, give us grants, would also be pulling their support because they don't trust the mismanagement that is going on.
I'm sorry, but we have run out of time. Thank you very much, all of you. I understand that the exemptions bill, is it back in Parliament or so? Habil Scooter is the one responsible for my outfit. Habil Scooter at Adringano Gates, East Legon. You can call them 0200 84 1988. I'm Samson Ladi Ayenini. Thank you very much. And my guests for the very final segment of the show have been Felix Kwache Ofosu, and Ejapa Mesa, Bright Simmons, and also Professor Bokping. Thank you also very much.